guys, it's Chantel with Wild Berry Quilting, and today I'm going to be making a dress, and I'm going to use this pattern right here, which is from Violet Field Threads. It's called the Ashton, and I really like this pattern company. I find that they do a very nice job of drafting things, and they just have some really adorable vintagey kind of looks. I will say that I normally have to increase the length of the skirts because they have a tendency to make them this vintage length, which we like things to be a little bit more modest here. And typically by the time the dresses start hitting the knees or they get above the knees, that means it's time to hand them down. So I'll add a little bit of length to the skirt portion, and that's probably going to be pretty much the only adjustment that I make. All right, let's get started. All right, so I have my pattern pieces cut out, and I used this old lace doily, and I've got that attached to my bodice, my front bodice piece. Now we are going to work on the next step, which is connecting these back bodice pieces to the front bodice. And this is going to be a fully lined dress, well, fully lined bodice, I should say. And because of that, we are going to actually construct 4 bodice. Essentially, we're constructing 4 bodices, and then we attach them. One will be on the inside, and the other will be on the outside and will be visible. Which is why I have so many pieces here. And this particular pattern calls for a half inch seam allowance. So that is what I am doing right now. We just put the right sides together. Got the shoulders of the back bodice piece and the shoulder piece of the front bodice piece. Now, I will say that this particular dress that I chose to make is a little bit different construction than what you would typically have. It's not something that a beginner couldn't do, but it is. I would probably suggest starting on a different dress first, just so that you can understand bodice construction before you jump right into this one, and you know that this isn't the way that it's always done. So, but this is going to be my placket piece. So I'm going to save this till the end. Well, not the end, but till we get to the skirt portion. So, and as far as you'll see that the way that I cut this doily, this is a raw edge. That's all going to get caught up. Try and angle this camera a little bit better so you're getting more. So the way that I cut this doily is that this is a raw edge, but that I'm not concerned about because it's all going to get caught in the neckline. Which, if this was a standard bodice construction, actually I think even with this one, X-nay on that last, where I started to say something different, because we're still going to do this portion the same. It's really like when we get to the sleeves and the sides that this one really starts to vary quite a bit. And again, that's why because this is a fully lined bodice, it means that I don't have to serge these shoulder seams. If I was going to leave this not lined, then I would want to serge those. And the way that I'm going to connect these is I'm going to turn one going in one direction, and then I'm going to nest the other one going in the other direction like this. And that'll give me a really flat shoulder seam, but also a lot of stability as well. And I like to use these quilt clips to hold everything in place. I find these work a lot better, for me at least, than pins. So I'll match up these shoulder seams first and clip them into place. And if you see, I've got a very small little triangle cut out, just a little nippet cut out right here at the very center of my bodice piece. And I did that on purpose so that I would very easily be able to find the center point. It just makes it easier to line everything up perfectly. And then I'm going to just clip it right over here as well. And right here. Oops. And then I'm going to throw everything on the floor because that's what I do. All right. So now I am going to sew along. So I'm going to sew. I'm going to sew along here, all around the neckline, and then down here on the other side as well. I'm going to leave, let me zoom out a little bit so you can see. I'm not going to be sewing this outer portion here on either of the sides, and I'm not going to sew the bottom in the front or the bottom on the two back pieces. All right. So let's go ahead and do this. And anytime I get to a point where I could just be pivoting, I actually sew right off of the edge because I find that gives me less puckering and a much cleaner finish in the end. Obviously, there are some construction methods where you would need to pivot rather than sew off the edge. Like, for example, if you don't have an edge there. But overall, I find that works. And if anybody would like a video on how to actually attach the doily, I can do that in a separate video. I did not include it in this one because I started sewing before I started recording. I just wasn't thinking about it. And I had a lot of people ask me to post the finished dress when it was done, and I thought maybe some people might actually enjoy seeing the process of sewing it as well. I'm just going along the neck hole. Now, my, what are those called? Pinking shears. Have a little bit of trouble getting through all of the really thick layers around the thicker layers. It's not super thick, but the thicker layers that are around the joint of the shoulders. So I just give those a little bit of help with my regular scissors. And then I continue the rest of the way around with my pinking shears till I get to those shoulder seams again. And there we go. So we can get rid of that. Now we're going to turn it right sides. So we're going to turn these, and my tip for any time that I am turning seams or turning an area like this is that I do not cut this at an angle. In fact, I'm not even going to trim along this. I'm just going to fold this along the seam and finger press it. And then I'm going to do the same thing along this seam and finger press it. And now I'm going to grab hold of it on the inside and on the outside, pinch it between my two fingers, and then just turn. And I get these nice, perfectly turned points. So hopefully, let's see how perfect that point is. So now I'm just going to do the same thing on this side. And then I am going to, because for some reason I was thinking that I could not top stitch the bodice into place yet, which, you know what, I probably will still press this bodice into place rather than top stitching like I normally would. Normally I would run a row of top stitching all the way around it, but I'm not going to do that this time because I would have to do that right through the lace doily, and purple thread is going to show up a lot on white lace, and white thread is going to show up a lot on this bright purple fabric. So I'm just going to press it down really nice, and then we'll proceed with the next step there. But before that, we are going to do some gathering stitches right along the sleeves. And look at that. Isn't that a funky shape for a sleeve? This is it folded in half so you can get an idea. It is a crazy shape for a sleeve, but it works. And it does not go together necessarily the way that you're going to expect it to. So you definitely have to follow the instructions on this one. So I am going to increase my stitch length all the way up to 5. And since I'm using 1/2 inch seam allowances, I am actually going to only do this at about 1/2 inch, or at using 1/2 inch seam allowances, I'm going to do this at about 1/4 inch and sew it along to gather it. Now, I'm not going to use the thread cutter on my machine because I want a long tail. And I am going to do this a second time. I did not go all the way to the end. I should have. That's okay because I'm going to do a second row of stitching. But I'm doing it spaced a little bit farther out. I want 2 side-by-side rows. And they're only about 1/8 of an inch apart. But this is going to make gathering it a lot easier than with a single thread. And it's also going to give me a lot nicer gathers. If you've done a lot of gathering, then you know what it's like to gather stitches and then have the thread snap and lose all of your progress. So having 2 lines of stitches prevents that from happening, or at least gives you an extra line of defense. Haha, a line. A line of stitching defense. So again, going about 1/4 of an inch. Oh, I wasn't supposed to use the cutter on my machine. Oops. At least I have a longer tail over here on this side. I can gather from that end. Now I'm going to go over about 1/8 of an inch and do it again. The main thing is that you are staying within your 1/2 inch seam allowance. That way none of your gathering stitches show and you don't have to have the extra hassle of going back through and ripping them all out. You certainly can rip them out if you want to, but there's really no need to, particularly on this dress, because this whole seam is going to be enclosed within your lined bodice. So I'm now going to need to gather the length of this sleeve to be the same length as the side of my bodice right here. And this fold that I have here is my center. So the easiest way to do this, pretty much the only way to do this, as far as if you're doing your gathers using this method, is you want to find one thread, either your top or your bottom. I've heard some people say that the bottom thread is easier to pull. I have not really noticed a difference. And you need to do the same thing for your other line of stitches. Do not pull both threads from the same line of stitches because it will bunch up in such a way that you cannot continue gathering. It's like it locks the stitches into place. And I can just sit here and gently gather these. And they go pretty easily. Now, I do use a different method of gathering for the skirt portion, but when we're talking about gathering sleeves, this is the method I use because it's the best way to get a controlled gather that you're going to have the control to match it up to the other piece. Now what I like to do is I gather it up to my center point, and then I will grab my threads on the other side. If I can get a hold of those. I will grab the threads on the other side of my sleeve, and I'll start gathering from this side until I get to the middle. And as you can see, it doesn't really take very long. It's, already most of the way done. I know a lot of people hate gathering, and it's not the most fun thing to do, but it's not as bad as it gets a bad rap. And I think that's mainly because too many people who have done it have had that thread snap on them when they're trying to attach it, and that is just such a nightmare when that happens. So I want this to be the same length. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this as my center. I've got this large crease right here. That's my center of my sleeve. I can just kind of match that up and make sure this is the right length, which it looks like it's about the right length. I could maybe let out a couple gathers. And I'll just kind of fiddle with these to make them a little bit more even. And I will check it on this side and make sure that it's even, the length, and that the gathers are even. And I'll clip all of that into place so that I can attach it. So let's do that. Grab our clips. I start at the beginning and then or not the beginning, the middle, and then we clip out at either end. And it looks like this is just about perfect. Just got to wiggle those gathers, and I've got it. And there is nothing wrong with pinning this to death if that makes you more comfortable, because there are a lot of gathers here, and sometimes it will make you feel better having more pins or clips or whatever in there. It'll help keep things from folding up underneath you. I like to try and get by with as few as I can, but I still will do these bits a little bit more. And I think I want to gather this just a tiny bit more. Make sure I'm grabbing the right threads to do that with. No, maybe I don't want to gather it more. It looks like it's actually a little bit shorter than this. All right, there we go. Just even those gathers and grab a clip. Now, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then I'm going to stitch it into place. I'll be back. All right, so I have this all attached. Now it is only attached to a single layer of that bodice, my front layer, not my inside bodice layer. That's important. We're going to attach it to that at a later step. So make sure that that inner bodice is out of the way and you are not attaching it. And we're just, oops, I hope if I put my stitch length back to normal. I'm going to cut that and start over again, just to make sure I have secure stitching. Now, you will, one reason that I start on both sides when I'm gathering, I'll do one side and then I will do the other side and meet in the middle, is so that I do not lose any of my threads, because it is very easy to start gathering and to have it, get away from you where you are just in the rhythm of gathering the stitches, and then the next thing you know, you have pulled your stitching right out the other side. I have done it before. It is not fun, and you will be sewing another line of gathering stitches. So if you start at one end and gather it to the middle and then go to the other end, you will help prevent that from happening. It also helps keep your fabric from fraying quite as badly because you're not running over the exact same spot, the exact same side over and over and over again. You are giving it a little bit of a break by gathering it partially from the other side as well. So it's half of the wear on your fabric edges, which, you know, if they're going to be enclosed, isn't too big of a deal. But it also depends on the fabric, because there are some fabrics that you will sew with that it is a big deal because it frays just by looking at it too hard. And those are usually not fun to sew with. There are fabrics that will give you a run for your money, or they will take your money and run with it because they'll just unravel all the way and you'll be out what you spent on them. So now I'm just sewing the other sleeve down. Oops, I'm catching my clips on the side of my sewing machine as I do that. As you can see, I have a little bit of the doily sticking out. I'm not worried about that. It's going to get caught in the seam and it's going to look the same on both sides, so it'll be fine. I already knew that was going to be the case when I cut it because it was not big enough to stay out of the seam allowances. So if you're enjoying this video, please remember to like and subscribe. It helps the channel. And the sooner we get to 1,000 subscribers, the sooner we can have our giveaway, or the sooner I'll draw our giveaway, I should say. And I already have a bunch of patterns set aside. I just went through all my patterns yesterday and set a bunch aside for the giveaway. And I think I have a ruler in there. And there's more to come. I know that much. All right, so this is how it's looking so far. I have not pressed it yet. I should have, but it's not a big deal. I'm just going to press it all at the same time, which is what I'm going to go do now because I need to press under that inner bodice piece. I'm going to press it in like this so that when I go to attach it, it'll already be folded under for me and I can catch that in my top stitching on this side. Okay, so I've gone through and I have pressed everything. This is all nice and flat in here now. And I pressed in about 3/8 of an inch along the inside bodice. So that can lay nice and flat when I go to stitch it into place, and that really does help. Do not skip over the step of pressing because your fabric will behave much easier. And this is one particular place where I would say I prefer pins over the clips. They just do a better job. Now, it is a little bit tricky. You have to watch for these pins to make sure you don't run over them, but you can see them the way that I have them laid. You can see quite a bit of it sticking out, and that is intentional so that I can quickly pull them out without running over them. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch in the ditch all along where it connects to, where the sleeve connects to the bodice. And each time I come to a pin, I'm just going to pull it out, and I'm going to continue to stitch in the ditch. I've got this little piece of fabric of the doily that turned up a little bit. I'm going to use this ditch stitching to help me tack that down facing the right way. And looks like I've got another needle coming up. I'm just going to continue to stitch. And it's possible that you might not catch all of your seam on the back. It can be a little bit fiddly like that. That's why we sew with a 1/2 inch to sew on the front of the bodice to the sleeve. And then when we press under 3/8 of an inch, just so that we have a little bit more fabric sticking past for us to be able to try and catch. And that's also why we press rather than just trying to make it work. And why we pin. Because you are a lot more likely not to catch everything if you don't pin. And let's see how we did. We've got, I came very close to not catching this part right here, but I did catch it. And I caught it all the way through. And just make sure that's over enough, which it is. Yep, I caught all of it. So let's do the other side and see how that goes. And just make sure that your pins are laid in such a way that you can easily pull them out with whichever hand you prefer to pull your pins out. Just dropped my pin cushion. My little strawberry. Ouch. All right. And away we go. Oops. I almost shot a pin off of my table. At least it would have been easy to find with the unicorn heads on the end. Which, by the way, these Tula Pink pins are my favorite for attaching a lining like this because of how long they are. And the flat pin head, it just makes it very easy to grab a hold of and to see everything, and in general, it just makes it a whole heck of a lot easier. I think I gathered this sleeve a little bit too tightly here. Looks a little bit more gathered to me than some of the other places, but it's fine. Nobody's going to notice. So this is coming together nicely. It's starting to look like the top part of a dress. We are sewn up inside and we caught everything just like we needed to. So now we are going to sew together the sleeves and actually make them look like sleeves, which we're going to sew right along here. Now this portion is not going to be in a, it's not going to be encased. So I am going to be serging these edges. And for years, I have just gone through and serged without stitching beforehand. And I haven't had any issues for the most part. But, you know, as time goes by, you learn a little bit, and I just want my stuff to last, not just for this generation, but hopefully future generations as well. And giving that extra line of stitching does two things. One, it adds more stability, but secondly, it also makes it so that you're in more control when you are stitching on your sewing machine than you are on the serger. So you are better able to line things up and get them to lay perfectly and attach them just the way you want them, and then you go back through and you serge it, and you'll end up with a nice serge. Now, before I go over to the serger, I'm going to prepare my skirt because I'm also going to serge this at the same time. And I want to do the same thing. I want to first sew it together and then serge it. And just make sure that if you have a right or wrong direction on your fabric, that you have it facing the right way. To me, I think this is kind of the right way. It's almost non-directional, but it kind of feels like it is directional because there's just more of them that are more of the flowers are pointing upwards in this direction than if I flip it over. It's pretty much only these guys that face upside down. So just make sure I have this the right way too, which I do. So I'm gonna stitch right along both sides. So that's one side done. And now I'm going to turn it over, making sure that my fabric's not been rolled around, because you don't want a twist in your fabric. And sew right down the other side. Now, before I take this to the serger, I'm going to remember which way was up on my fabric, which I guess it was this way. And this is my center seam. I want to grab my scissors, wherever they may be. Here's a pair. And I just want to make about a 2-inch cut right down that center fold. Doesn't matter. I mean, if you have a very clear choice between which you want to be your front and which you want to be your back, then you want this to be your back. So just make sure that you are paying attention to that. It looks like I made this about 2 1/4. I think I'm actually going to go down to 2 1/2. All right. So I've got this little cut here. Now I am going to be grabbing my placket. So we're going to lay our placket piece on the bottom here, right sides facing our skirt and this cut in our skirt. And we're going to sew 1/8 of an inch, just barely catching both of those fabrics. We're going to take it all the way up to the point of our cut. There we go. And then we're going to turn the whole skirt up this way, out of our way, and lay the other half of our cut right here over the top. And make sure we caught all that fabric there. All right. And then we're going to cross our fingers and hope that we didn't end up with a pucker, which I don't think we did. So I think we're good. And I'm just going to fold this over about 1/2 of an inch and stitch it down. Well, bring it over here, just over the top of our, where we laid our stitching down, and cover it up. Now, it's really easy to get a twist here, so don't be afraid to use your clips to hold everything in place, or your pins if you want to actually pin it into place. But it is kind of nice to use the clips because then you can move it around and adjust it, but still be holding this fabric in place. Or you can actually, better yet, take it to your iron and iron that down. But I don't feel like doing that right now, and I don't find it pivotal to iron it, so I am going to just align it and pin it, or clip it. Now I'm going to sew this into place. I'm going to sew it as close. I'm going to lay that right over the top of our stitches and sew it as close as I can there. Making sure that we are enclosing all of that though. And that we aren't putting any folds into our skirt, because that will give us puckers. And we don't like puckers. All right. So there's our placket, and Now would be a good time to press that into place, and you'll see just how pretty it came out. But it looks like we did well, and I do not see any puckers there. This would just fold down like this to line up these two ends and then iron it. And you can't even see that it's there. So that's how we do that. Now, this is going over to the serger along with our sleeves, and we are going to serge all of that. All right, here we are at my serger, and I'm just going to lift my presser foot and lay this under. And I really don't have to get this at exactly 1/2 inch because we've already sewn our line of stitching at 1/2 inch. I'm just making sure that I have all of this nicely finished. And yes, I have blue thread on my serger right now. I do not always care to match the color of my thread to my projects, and I always have a variance in the colors of my thread. My spools are all slightly different shades of blue right now. And it's just basically whatever cones I happen to have that I feel like look pretty at the time that I am starting my machine. So there's our sleeve pieces serged and ready to go. Now we just need to serge the sides of our skirt. And that's the baby making her noises. I'm sure you could probably hear that. She is the one this dress is for. I think she's playing a game right now and she is annoyed with something in it. Now, anytime you are using a serger, you always need to be very mindful of the fact that you not only have 2 needles right here, as opposed to just the one on your sewing machine, but you also have a knife blade right here. And it is very sharp. It cuts off a piece of your fabric as you're going, and it will cut off pieces of fingers too. So don't let that happen. You need to pay attention and keep your fingers away from that area of the machine. All right. So I've got these sides all done. I've got the sleeve portions done. Next, I am going to be gathering my skirt pieces. And I like to do this on my serger. I find it to be the fastest way to do it. Now, that being said, you do have to adjust your settings. So I will go through and do that, and then I will come back rather than making you watch me all that. do all of that. And if you want a demonstration on how to do gathering, I'll make that a separate video. All right, guys, that's the end of part 1 of the dress sew along for that Ashton dress that I'm working on. So please remember to hit like and subscribe. And if you push that bell icon, it'll notify you when I post the next part of this. All right, talk to you later. Bye.